Well, you know, we
Maybe
skip lunch, you get a little
later.
late lunch there. So. All right, everybody, thank you so much for attending this session. It's entitled The Consumer Warrior, The Insatiable Appetite for Sports, Media, Fitness, and Health Technology, from wearables to games and TV. My name is Brian Burke, and I'm the CEO of Smashing Ideas. We're a digital engagement agency based out of Seattle, Washington. We make digital products for our clients, which are numerous Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies. They're effectively getting into connected experiences, smart products, Internet of Things, and it just so happens that we're starting to dip our toe into the health space as well. Hence why I was asked to moderate this panel. But I'm actually surrounded by some actually smarter people here who actually know the respective industries better than I do. In this panel, we are going to explore a few areas that we believe are relevant to the overall title that this has been given. One of them will be ultimately what really matters to consumers. And first of all, why are they purchasing wearables and connected fitness experiences at the highest adoption rate since the advent of the iPad, digital tablets? We'll also take a look at sports and how will wearables and associated technology improve and accelerate our understanding of athlete performance. But what does this also mean to the individual athlete as a professional and also to their teams? As well, we will consider the benefits to our health. The opportunities that are endless for us to explore ultimately include our whole health, how wearables will improve systemic health, analysis, and the use of data and how it will expand our understanding of well-being. We will also discuss the accelerated adoption, once again, in the consumer space and whether or not the consumer is truly in control of the life cycle of these experiences and what are the privacy concerns around those, because it's quite a bit at the forefront as this area evolves. So I'd like to introduce the rest of our panel. We'll start here with Kellerman.
Yeah, thanks for having me, everybody. My firm is Moreland Partners. We are a global M&A advisor. We typically are representing companies on the sell side in the technology sector. And one of the reasons that I was asked to participate in this panel is we recently sold a digital fitness business to Under Armour. And we're actually in the process of closing a transaction in the professional sports media space, which I could talk about at a high level, but no specifics.
I'm Rendell Swart. I'm with Arxan Technologies. I think we were asked to be on this panel because we're a security firm that focuses on the application security and data security side. So we've seen a lot of medical device companies and one-off use cases come to us to help them protect their application and their data, and then as well their either customer privacy or potentially their content. So I'm here to just talk a little bit about security and the impact of wearable devices on people's private information as well as copyrighted content.
I'm Kirk Dulaney. For the past 12 years, I have done strategic business development for Sony until this month, of which I have stepped out from Sony, and I'm now bringing together different companies to create a solution around sports fitness, specifically in where the wearables and the technology can meet with performance and how that can be taken to the next level. I have, in the last few years, brought to the market several different products, including the Sony Smart Tennis Sensor. So sensor technology tied to the sports, as well as the latest device that Sony came out with, the Smart Beat Trainer, that includes, it's a standalone, so you don't need a phone or anything else to be able to track everything there is about your run, including having your music right on hand. So that's what I've done.
I'd love to talk with you about that. Hi, my name's Laura Rumble. I'm with Intel Corporation. I actually work in Intel Labs, which is the R&D portion of Intel. I am a user experience researcher, so I have the opportunity to go out and talk to the end users of our customers' products. I work in the IoT space. I've crossed intersections, or what we call the business units of Intel, both in the smart home space, the smart health space, transportation space, wearables, all of what we think of as the IoT areas or the different nodes within IoT. So I believe that's why they have me on this panel. I have a nice cross-section of multiple aspects of IoT, but especially the end consumer and how the end consumer perceives the usages, or what we call use cases within that spectrum, and always looking at it from their perspective and their priorities in mind.
Thanks so much, everyone. With that in mind, Laura, I'd like to talk a little bit about those use cases and specifically in the sports space. We had a conversation around the evolution of wearables and how it is about what's on our wrist, to a certain extent, the Apple Watch, but that it's expanding even more into smart fabrics and such. When we talk about sports and professionals, what are some of the things that you're seeing right now? And then perhaps you can talk about with Intel Labs that you're experimenting with, or at least the dialogue that's happening there in that area.
Yeah, well, Intel works with many customers in what we call the wearable space. And wearable, again, I think many people attribute it immediately to what the known paradigm is today, which is something you have on your wrist, something that you can wear on your head. Google Glass did either a great service or disservice to that particular area of the body. But in many cases for sport, it is what we consider smart fabric or intelligent fabrics, or sometimes it's called soft computing. And there's many positive attributes to the consumer and user for this type of tracking device. It's nascent. You don't have to it's always collecting data about that particular user, heart rate, perspiration, and from those and other data points can be extracted. And there's interesting triangulation that not only the athlete can look at in trends over time with regards to that data, but also the coach or the team owner. And then that proves a tipping point. There's a lot of value that could be looked at by that particular athlete. And then there's also potentially a negative. How could this data potentially be used to increase the athlete's performance over time and used to help coach this athlete to become better? But how could it potentially be used against the athlete? And these are those types of privacy concerns about who owns this data on behalf of this athlete and how data is valuable. And I think that that's the topic of the discussion that we really need to have. Not only where does it go, who has access to it, and ultimately who owns it, and to what benefit, to what user.
I think it's a good one for Kelvin.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. They've actually been collecting data on the athletes for decades using cameras. And one of the things that popped into my head as you were saying this is that I don't think that athletes probably ever viewed that as an invasion of their privacy, but the fact that the sensors are on their body makes it probably feel more personal and creates a level of privacy that you may not want that information necessarily shared with other people. But in reality, there are businesses like Stats that track all of the movement by a camera and sell those back to those professional sports teams, and they use those every day to make decisions about player performance.
And right now, even consumers have the ability to purchase something like the Basis Peak. Is anyone familiar with the Basis Peak? First of all, does anyone have own wearables right now? Is anyone wearing one right now? They're kind of fun, aren't they? So listen, so the Basis Peak actually delivers real-time measurement of metrics from heart rate to skin temperature to perspiration. It's a lot of data. And when we think about one of the topics that we spoke about, Kelman, quantifiable self, the consumer, how much of that data do they really need to know? Do they really, how are they really going to use this data? Is it more important for the consumer, or is the sports professional and their team more interested in this type of information?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it depends on who you ask. I've had conversations with product managers at Google X, which is developing their wearable technology. And his view very clearly was that the products on the market today are garbage. And not only is the information that they track highly inaccurate, it's also not very actionable. And so, his specific view was that, all these devices ultimately end up in the desk drawer after about 6 months because they don't provide real information that can be used in an actionable way by the consumer. And so what I think you'll see coming out over the next few years is, some actually sensor capabilities. Right now, the sensors just aren't strong enough to, meaningfully capture data that, as he sort of framed it, was, available to be used by doctors. And that was the goal that they had set. And I think over the next few years, you'll start to see some of that capability coming to market. And with respect to your question about do the consumers need this or not, I think there's also a question of a price point. So, Nike actually created this shoe that had a sensor in it where it could tell you everything from your vertical to your speed and all sorts of information, but it was a $600 retail shoe.
Yep.
And what they found was that only the professional market was really interested in that product. And so they ultimately shut it down, the entire project. But it was I think an interesting test of how much is the consumer willing to pay for this information.
Hey, Brian,
Yeah.
I want to make a comment on this, and that
You
is
bet.
that I think that there's you brought this around to the consumer using these devices.
Yeah.
I'm going to take it to the consumer getting the information related to the device. I'm going to go back to the professional piece.
Yep.
But it's the consumer, I think, that's going to drive the requirement, if you will, in the sports, world for these professionals to wear devices and to use devices and more cameras to track things, because they're going to want to see the statistical data. They're going to want to know the information, right?
Mhm.
And they're going to drive that. I've spent lots of time with large sports networks who are all about the statistical data. And they're saying that the more and more we're able to do, the more and more the consumer wants to see more information and see graphs and data about particular players.
Mhm.
Another layer for
Interesting.
fantasy football to be able
That's
to
exactly
That's it, right.
figure
where it
out
heads.
who their picks are going to be.
That's it. I mean, in baseball, obviously, it's all about stats, right? But it's in every sport this could be used, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's expansive. You talk about the information that Google X was sharing. Relatively, it's junk and it's being thrown in a drawer. It's funny because PricewaterhouseCoopers. Now, normally I wouldn't actually do research with them on them, but relative to this space, but they do support that. In fact, they put out a report on the future of wearables, and actually it was released in October or November of last year. And 33% of those surveyed who purchased a wearable technology device more than a year ago now say they no longer use the device at all or infrequently. In fact, they said price, privacy, security, and the lack of actionable and inconsistent information from such devices are among consumers' main apprehensions with the burgeoning category. And there's a big concern. 86% said that they were concerned over privacy and security. So Rendell,
Yeah.
your company, let's talk a little bit about that
Yeah.
from the consumer standpoint, but also from the professional standpoint.
Sure. From the consumer standpoint, I think it all depends upon what is the business model of the company that they bought that wearable device from.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the reasons why the wearable device ends up in the drawer is because there isn't anything to do with that data after it's been captured on the device itself. It could be buried in the firmware. The content could maybe be uplinked into your computer, but then what do you do with it?
Mhm.
If you're in charge of that data, the privacy concerns are less because you can tell where it's going to go. I think as firms like Google and others start to make connected devices which automatically uplink, let's say, that data from your wearable device through your phone up into the cloud into a space where Google can aggregate it with lots of other data, that's when your data is really getting out there.
Mhm.
And it's the security measures that these companies who bring these products to market, how do they architect this? If, as what I just described does come out, let's say with Google's version of a wearable device, that means that information flows freely right from your phone up into the cloud, and
Right.
you don't have that much control over it. Now, if they architect a way for you to turn that on or off, you would have more control over the security of where that data goes. But ultimately, I think there are also concerns around hacking. And what if somebody hacks my app? Or maybe your phone gets hacked and you don't even know it because it's a drive-by hack where somebody can root your phone. Let's say you're an important person, somebody roots your phone, you don't even know that it was rooted. And now information from various different applications are becoming available to people that you never intended
Right.
to have access to that. So there's a lot of different privacy concerns to consider, but it all depends upon the company's business model and who brought that product to market. And then certainly companies like that can use products like Arxan has to protect those applications from, even if you're running on a rooted device, we'll be able to protect that application from only sending information to where you wanted it to send it to, rather than what a hacker can potentially tamper with that application and change its behavior. Right. So there's technology out in the marketplace that allows companies to very finitely control how that data is moved and who has access to it. But it's also a valid concern on the end user, because it's up to the companies to do that work properly.
Right.
So there's a lot of, I think, difficulty in the consumer understanding really what are the privacy implications from one wearable device to another.
But the data has value, right? So when we start talking the professional
Absolutely.
side, Kirk, when it's real quickly, because Kirk talking about the tennis sensors, right? I mean, tennis is big business. And if some of these sensors in a pro's racket, that information is valuable to the competition.
Correct.
So, I mean, let's talk about, I mean, maybe go along that a little bit. Tell me a little bit your thoughts on that. And does Sony employ anything like that relative to security measures for this?
Sure. Well, so there's security measures built into anything that's put out there in the marketplace.
Yeah.
But, and I'm going to put a but to that, we all have likely either an Apple or a Android phone, right? Mm-hmm. And anyone that has downloaded any application, if you could tell me why when I download a calculator, why it needs access to my phone records, I'd love to know that, but I had to agree to it to get my calculator, right? So reality is that we're agreeing to certain information going out there and being available somewhere, right? They can be hacked, and we talked about this before the panel got started. But reality is that you are agreeing to have information out there, but it's also how valuable is that to you, what you're going to get back out of it, right? Yeah. And so professional, you just talked about professional tennis and what have you. It's really going to drive sports to some extent, right? Tennis specific related to the Sony tennis sensor is a declining sport in some respects, right? But you bring in technology like this and you bring it to the TV and you bring it the value of that data. You tie something together that tells you everything that's going on in the court. Consumers see more value in what they're viewing, right? And so that may be worth it to those professionals and to, it definitely is to the consumers and to the networks to have that type of information.
Right.
It's balanced.
Laura, you were
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head, right? Data is valuable, but it intrinsically just on its own, if you look at a statistic over and over again of how many steps you walked every day, I mean, a consumer doesn't necessarily see that as valuable, other than it's potentially motivational for them to get up and move a bit more every day. So that could be valuable. But what intrinsically is more valuable to a consumer is triangulating that data with things that are contextually relevant to that consumer throughout the day, such as how well they slept, with how well they're eating, with the stress that they have ongoing in their lives. Now, again, this gets a bit paradoxical, because in order for the system to glean these data flows, to tie in and understand how stressed they could be, they would have to have access to that consumer's calendar. What meetings did you have? Were you traveling? Who did you meet with? How well did you sleep? They're going to have to access potentially a wearable device to understand how well you're sleeping. You're going to have access to your diet application. So it's going to have to synthesize all of this information, which increases the privacy concern for the user. However, I'm a user experience researcher. Users, the more actionable and meaningful you give a user perceives, or a person perceives their data to be, it's an inverse relationship. The more valuable the data is, the less people are concerned about their privacy, because it's more actionable, it's more meaningful to them. And if, just like when you were talking about your agreement, I have to sign this, give you access calendar for all the stuff on my phone. We do it all the time with our Apple, agreements. We do it every day. Sure, I need it right now, so yes, I grant you access. So the more meaningful and your data set can be for your user, the less concerned they are about privacy. But the catch is you have to create value for whatever that data is you're presenting back to the user.
Yeah, it's interesting. You brought up the topic of sleep, and some of you in the audience are probably familiar with the Jawbone Up. There was actually a study that Jawbone have done. So first of all, they have the largest repository of sleep data globally of any company. And one of the studies that they did recently on a professional athlete, Andre Iguodala of the Warriors, was they had him wear and up while he was performing for part of the season. And none of the data was fed back to the coach or the team. It was purely just to see if they could derive some information about sleep patterns and correlate that with performance. And one of the interesting things they found, not only did his performance improve, but his minutes actually went up. The more sleep he got, the more minutes he was playing. And that obviously was, a direct result of the coach seeing improved performance in the court and allowing him more time to play in those games where he got more sleep. But you can imagine how valuable that information would be if the coach already knew going in that, hey, he might be a high performer tonight because he had 9 hours of sleep last night. So they're finding all sorts of really interesting data that can be used to sort of help drive decisions in the professional sports market.
That's great. And so let's talk a little bit that, because you bring in sleep, we think about whole health and the importance of sleep. How are wearables changing the way, or maybe they aren't yet, but in general, giving us a new perspective on whole health? How can they actually help us with systemic health, remote monitoring, whatever it may be? Some of us may not be in that space. I know, Laura, you are. We had another gentleman who was supposed to join us who does have a company called Jointly Health, which is about remote monitoring for health. It is about systemic health. It's about whole health and how an athlete will perform. Any thoughts on that, anyone, relative to that?
Well, I think there more and more we're seeing devices coming out that are not just focused on one part of your health, but are looking at many different facets of your body during the day, be it respiration, stress levels, maybe heart pressure, your pressure, or let's say if you're a diabetic and it's checking your insulin level. There's many different phases of devices that can be classified, by the FDA that consumers are starting to wear. And our experience has been more with the devices that are regulated by the FDA. So class 3 devices, class 2 devices, ones where if something were to happen with it, there might be a physical impact on that user, either illness or death, because that insulin wasn't delivered. And so for us, the security gets more intense as you go up to that class 3 device, where it's very important for that data, first of all, to be accurate so that the insulin levels are read accurately. And so the pump can make the determination, how much insulin should I add back into that user's system? But I think it's interesting, as Laura's talking about, a lot of this also relies on the analytics and making sure that all this disparate data is somehow analyzed with algorithms and put together into something that you can really make decisions on in your everyday life. And right now, most of the devices where true security is being thought about, through and through by large medical device manufacturers, it is that class 3 device that's either maintaining your heartbeat or maintaining your insulin levels. I think as time evolves and these applications get better at aggregating all this data, we'll see more and more people being concerned about the safety aspect of it, because now there's a much bigger picture about a person's health maybe out there on the internet.
Agreed.
I'm curious, are those devices regulated by HIPAA?
There's HIPAA regulation, but most of the HIPAA regulation is determined or applied in a hospital or between doctors and patients. Medical devices is more in the realm of the FDA, and the FDA has gotten cybersecurity regulations out there, but they're still quite a bit behind. It's amazing. The digital media industry and frankly the gaming industry are some of the most advanced with regards to securing software. Financial services is lagging behind, but starting to catch up, but medical devices is quite a ways behind.
So I sit on the Consumer Electronics Association Health and Fitness Board, and this is a major topic of the where you bridge, but that is one of the things that I focus on and think about is how do you bridge over, right? Because until you get there, you have consumers out there using devices that are tracking some of this information that they want to know on a daily basis. Then the question becomes, how do you slowly get them to the point where they see value in delivering that information to someone who can then give them feedback on how to live healthier, right? Or, how to interact with their health professionals, if you will, or bridge that all the way up into a device that you normally use that maybe integrates with, right? A type of device like this that you can use as a medical device, right? But understand that you're starting at a consumer level from a, call it entertainment level almost, and then bridging over into a health. I don't like to use the word medical very much because that really gets stringent. But coming from that fitness and experience of sports entertainment over to the health world.
There was an article in Wired late last year called Health Wearables, the Sherlock Holmes Effect. Sherlock Holmes will, in the movies, he can basically analyze a person just by, maybe they're walking a little strained. He can actually sense their heart rate. And I love it. But is that what doctors are doing? I don't want to go too far on the medical side. But this article by Dr. Richard Hughes said the entire concept of useful health information until quite recently has centered around complex specialized tests such as CT and MRI scans, ECGs, and other laboratory tests. But the actual function of an individual has only been measured to a small extent and at infrequent intervals. In short, we aren't looking at the whole picture. So the advent of these wearables and the ability for us to get away from the Sherlock Holmes effects, where I'm not knocking doctors. Are there any doctors in the room? Okay, good. There are tests, they are valid tests, but it is that whole health picture and the ability for wearables possibly to transform that. And it's not just in sports, but in sports, let's face it, these athletes are under a lot of strain as well. And there are times when we need to know, and the professionals need to know how they're doing. And human beings need to know. What do you have there?
Well, that plays exactly into that smart retrainer that we talked about earlier from Sony, that they actually built into this, the ability it takes your heart rate while you're running through your ears.
Wow.
But more importantly, you set parameters. It knows what your heart rate is and can then slow down your music. Or speed up your music depending on what you're trying to accomplish, right? But it will literally, I've used this quite a bit. It will literally go, let's slow this down and put a new song on to slow you down. And if you're still not going at the right speed, it will slow you down more. So it'll change the song again to get you even further down to where your heart rate should be, because it sees you at a level that it shouldn't be at.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can I ask a continuation question on that? I'm familiar with Sony sports cams. When do you feel that there will be an integration of the camera with that device? Because it has I use adrenaline TV, so my athletes are always on the edge of radical fall, radical crash, whatever it is. And if you realize that he's becoming less and less, his heart rate's up and his whatever parameters are checking him for mind ability to he's going to overload. He's going to overload until he crashes. So if you go back and check those metrics, you can see where the guy's getting to the point of too much information, too much muscular exertion, whatever it is. But that's where it needs to go. Not that I'm telling you. That's where I see the future.
So real quick for everyone, just to back a little bit, it's in the thing that I work for Sony. I actually left Sony this month. I'm now working as independent. Sony is my first client, actually. But just to be, so I'm not going to say anything specific for Sony, but I will tell you that theoretically, in the world irrelevant of Sony, you will see camera technology, right, and sensors merging. And I would say it's not in too far distant future. And I will tell you that, my opinion, they will be really cool capabilities that will tell you a lot more than you could imagine.
I'm thinking it's going to be like an Iron Man thing where you're going to see what he's actually visualizing. And then on the right here, you'll see heart rate, perspiration, exertion level, quantity of glycan or stores of energy left, 10, 12 of them.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Good.
I imagine that technology already exists in the military complex. It just hasn't quite made it to consumer devices yet.
Right.
But yeah, there's a whole host of information I think that can be used.
Absolutely.
All depends upon how it's being controlled and who has access to it.
No doubt.
And in the tech world, for example, we do view cameras as sensors. You have depth sensing cameras, IR cameras. So you can use them for multiple use cases and application. So you can,
Yep.
And in the sports world, that's wide open. So it is merging.
When we look at personal training as well, is a smartphone, I'm just throwing this out there, the wearable with the smartphone, is that the best usability? Is that the best experience that we have right now? So for example, I'm at home, maybe doing P90X, which I don't, by the way, I should. But it's, I'm looking at my television, and let's say, for example, I have a wearable, and I do want to, check my heart rate, and I want to see how active I am. But then that data then appears later on my phone, and I'm not realizing it in real time. One of the concepts that actually Kirk and I discussed a little bit, and Laura a little bit too as well, was that idea of the usability of wearables. Is it sort of post information, or what happens in real time? And is there a potential for us to think bigger about where this is going? Let's say, for example, I am watching P90X on my TV, and a television is actually taking a feed from my wearable so that I can see it in real time, what my workout looks like. Because I wonder sometimes how effective they are as oh, great, I did this much at that workout, and maybe there's an analysis of it there. But is that where we think it's going? At least I would love to see it go that direction.
I'd say that's where it's going. I will say this, and that is that if anyone's ever been to Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, and you've walked through any of the large consumer electronics booths over the last 3 years, you've seen demonstrations of exactly what he's talking about. I scratch my head to this day as to why that has not come out at a consumer level to people to use at a very strong integrated experience. But everyone has demonstrated, everyone's been thinking about it for years now. Everyone's been talking about it. But
I think part of the problem is, honestly, is that there only 1/10 of the population is really into sport that much. And that a large percentage of it are either too young, too old, or just too out of shape to give a rat's ass at this point, trying to be honest.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's where, and in the future, I think it will grow because people realizing, you know what, I can extend my life 10, 20 years if I just sort of don't do that. And then I think that we're getting smarter, but it's going to be a little bit of an uphill. Again, as we lose people like my mom who can't remember the password to her computer might need.
But that 10% you're talking about is
Yeah.
millions of people.
I'm not saying
Right.
it's not big.
And more importantly, if you really look at the deep down in the statistics, and I don't have it in front of me, and I'm not going to quote anything I don't know exactly, but one of the largest percentage of workouts is in the home.
Mm-hmm.
They're standing in front, exactly, the P90X, they have their own treadmill, they have their own bicycle, whatever it may be, and they're in front of the television. Sony did launch and as a matter of fact, if you have a Sony television, you go to the home screen, there's a little running green man on there. You click on it, you can actually go in there and access content from Gaiam and other companies that you can actually work out in front of your television to that content and be able to interact. So.
And who would have thought, for example, that there's a Mike Bell actually from Intel, Mike then, right? So that's the name I have it here. He was quoted in USA Today relative to the prediction that there'll be 285 million wearables in the market by 2017. That's not just consumers. I'm assuming that's other areas.
And those are not only sport. And that's what I wanted to bring back to. I think, many of the kind of nascent tracking devices, sport tracking devices are inherently dumb. They're there collecting data about you. And then when they come into contact with another device, they upload that data so the user can do something with it. Review it, look at it in context to other trends over time, do something with it, right? But as we look at a lot of other wearable devices, and some of those numbers that he's talking about are just in general, right?
Right.
Our smartwatch devices, which has multiple use cases outside of sport. So for that, I think it begs the question as we move into a larger IoT world, your question about what screen is relevant for what data, I think really should be relevant in a machine learning process for what is preferred by the user.
Right.
If the user is walking by a large screen and it's a larger data set to review and they're at home and that's their preferred screen to review that data, that should be known by the larger system, and that's just a screen.
Absolutely.
If they are out and about and they get something and then they have a smart watch and that's their phone knows that it's in their pocket or their bag, that is something that's an alert. They can look at that on their watch. If it's, if they're with their PC, that's the screen. Again, it's just a screen. And I think that this is, in many ways, and we don't know the true vision, but, IoT would enable this opportunity.
Right. Well, that's the thing is if PricewaterhouseCoopers says in their study, it was 1,000 participants,
Right.
but the 33% ditched their wearables. The
Right.
consumer's going to want more. It has to be more relevant. We have to think about how that would apply to a different screen.
And also
so
think
the
about
use
where you
case-
are. If you're driving in your car,
Yeah.
is that the place to have it? You know, so it's all contextually relevant to what's happening in your immediate environment.
Exactly, exactly. Knowing this right now, Kellerman, oh, go ahead, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I found interesting. So we sold a company called Endomondo, which was a health and fitness tracking application with 20 million users across Europe, to Under Armour, which has now built the largest digital fitness community in the world. One of the other assets that they bought in that category was MyFitnessPal. And I had an opportunity to chat with the founder of MyFitnessPal about what they see in their business and the usage within their platform. And MyFitnessPal is more about what you eat and your diet and how many calories you're taking, that sort of thing. And one of the things that he told me that I found fascinating was that not only were people willing to share that in a social media context, they were also forming communities online. People who didn't know one another were forming communities with people they didn't know, they'd never met, but that had similar weight loss goals, and they were not competing, but encouraging one another and sharing their eating habits with one another on a daily basis, which I found very surprising because to me that's something that I would think most people would find very personal. But obviously they're getting a reward out of sharing that information and having a community that's helping them support their goals.
Kellerman, you're in the M&A space. So when we talked about the quantifiable self, and Gary Wolf of Wired, editor Wired, in a TED Talk said that almost everything that we do generates data. Let's talk about this. Who actually wants to own this data? Because this data has value, right? And so in the M&A space, is there something there, or can you talk? Is that too much?
Clearly Under Armour does. I mean,
Yeah.
they very publicly came out and kind of poked Nike and Adidas in the eye and said, we're number one at something. And I think they're a really interesting company. I mean, they're relative to the rest of the fitness apparel market, they're the youngest player in the block, and they've been very aggressive and very creative around their strategy in digital. And so I think that they recognize that the world is going digital, and that ultimately their customers are going to want a digital life, and they're going to need a home for all of that information. And how do they manage it, share it, engage with it? They want to be that platform, and so far they're winning.
Yeah. I think the company that enables the end user to control where that content goes will gain the trust of the end user.
Right.
Because as much as Under Armour might want to own the data, if they don't have the consent of the user, and if the user doesn't feel there's a level of trust there with the manufacturer of that device or that wearable, they're not going to use it. It is going to get left in that drawer. But
Let me just clarify one thing. So they do not necessarily have interest in owning the wearable. They want to be the platform where you take your data and you send your data there, and then you decide what you do from there. If you want to share it on Facebook, you can do it from that platform. If you want to just compare it with your friends, you can do it on their platform. But they want to be that platform, regardless of whether you have an Up or a Nike Fuel Band or an Apple Watch, that you can then take your information and share it socially and engage with it in whatever way you want. But it would be all permission-based. They're not looking to push your information out there if you don't want it out there.
And I imagine that's why they're successful, because they do have a platform that allows a user the level of finite control over their data and where it goes. And ultimately, I think from a security and safety concern, that's where the manufacturers really need to focus, is to make sure that from a client side and server side, that they give their users the control over that data flow.
I mean, data is big business. Every consumer, every one of us should own our own data, because other people right now are making money off of it. I mean, when you think about the job titles that are now associated with data, there's data brokers, there's data analysts. There's a data economy around consumer data. So you need to we all need to be very responsible for our own data and understand, do a little research and understand the possibilities and how people are profiting off of our own personal data.
But then
Because
just
right now
hit
we are not.
accept.
Yeah, just keep
Yeah, you do,
accepting
and give
because
them
I
your
need
data.
that calculator.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, Google and Apple, they're a great example of
That's
that.
right.
Uh,
Perfect.
a lot of that data is being gathered without really our knowledge and maybe
Mhm.
just our,
It's
not
overwhelming.
consent, it's tacit consent in that
Right.
you don't really know that it's being generated, but your
Mhm.
actions are creating,
Absolutely.
implications on your behalf, which Google can glean information from and sell to marketers.
It's overwhelming for the daily consumer. It is, but we do need to
To
be.
follow up on that point, let's say it's an insurance company that's looking for that data too.
Yes.
because
Yep.
What are you doing to make sure that those consumers feel like their privacy and their information is not going to be compromised? We read security breaches every day from enormous
That's right.
companies, and suddenly your whole medical record is out there. It just seems like that's one of the firewalls for a lot of people, keeping their own medical information together in one place because they feel it's going to be used against them.
Yeah.
Agreed. I think that, again, you talk about who can win. I think that companies that are creative about that, and I'm not talking about his piece, which is security. I'm talking about the consumer experience side of this.
Mhm.
And that is that if a company has a lot of data on the fact that you exercise 3 times a week and you run so much and you do this, this, and the other, and they come to you and tell you that we can actually offer you Aetna health insurance for $500 less a month as long as you let Aetna see the data that's coming off of the devices you're wearing, you as a consumer go, well, maybe that's worth it to me, right?
But I think the flip side is they say we're not going to insure you, that they're looking for.
That's right.
Agreed.
Misuse the information, not to do it.
That's
a
the
big fear
tipping
for a lot of
point.
people.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And there's two sides to that coin. There's the data that you think you're in control of, and back to your point, companies that are going to be creative in allowing the user to manage that data and create a architecture where it's user friendly and it's easy to share that data with other systems or other platforms which you like to use. Maybe it's Facebook, maybe it's Instagram, maybe it's Under Armour. Those are all good business models for users to gain or for companies to gain adoption with users. The problem that gentleman was pointing out is on the backside is what are those companies doing to protect your data once it's in a database, behind a firewall, in a network which is supposedly secure, just like Home Depot and Target and all these other companies, they thought they were secure, but somehow a hacker was able to ferret in through some back-end network, and now that they are a trusted user on an administration platform, they are able to attack an application or a database and suck all that information out. I think a lot of the due diligence that companies are doing on security are focusing on some of the wrong areas, in that they're focusing on perimeter securities and
Right.
not really focused on specific application security. And application security is, what we help companies focus on at the client device. However, how much effort is being put into that security on the server
That's
side,
right.
behind the firewall side.
It's becoming more and more important, obviously,
Yeah.
because once there is a data breach and that's associated with their names, such as Target or Home Depot, their brand loses, tremendous
Loses-
value.
Yeah, and
So-
that's what companies like Medtronic and
That's right.
these large device companies are very concerned about. But it's also the Googles and other large companies of
That's
the
right.
world that have all this data behind firewalls.
Becoming more
Bigger
important.
elephant in the room on that one would be Sony.
They're not in the room.
What?
They're not in the room.
That way, I meant more like,
Yeah.
talk about getting hacked and your reputation and what that was the huge sock in the gut for Sony, and
Sure.
it keeps playing out in their business. It's not gone away. There's stuff still keeps coming out leaking. Did you see that he said this about that? And then
Mhm.
because there's so many nuggets of gold in there that they're sorry.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
there was the PlayStation hack, and then there was the
Mhm.
Sony Pictures corporate hack.
uh-huh.
PlayStation is hacking a product to
That's
gain
right.
access to do something on a platform.
And all the people that play that game.
Exactly, and
the other
all
hackers
those
were just
games.
to ruin the business.
Yeah, well, that's an invasion of corporate privacy. So there's a lot of internal information that was all of a sudden just thrown out to the world,
Right.
and that just goes back to what are companies doing to protect themselves from that? How did they get access to that? And the spectrum is so wide, which is why it's such a difficult problem.
When I heard Sony stopped all of the communication with all outside computers. I mean, there was
And-
no internet at all at the.
I think Sony is trying to do more and more, or is doing more than almost any company to prevent this because how they've been targeted.
Yeah.
And they're targeted by hackers, in China, in Korea, in Russia. Who knows what the true agenda was of those hackers, but they're creating a poster child for, security by doing this to Sony. And
Firewall.
And as have, the other brands that we just talked about,
Yeah.
Home Depot, Target. I mean, these companies that have been attacked find themselves now under constant attack and are doing more and more, doubling down to make their system much more secure. I mean, I think that they have become, as you're saying, poster children for other brands to not
be like
to
that.
not have that experience for their end users.
And it gets more complex, right? I mean, if we talk about on the IoT side, there's only
Yes.
some environments that you'll be able to control. And when you expose data and information to other environments or systems, then that changes the whole ballgame unless it's encrypted on both sides. And you have to hope that there's double encryption, right? We have about 13 minutes left, and then we'll open it up for questions after that. Or we may go a little bit longer because we're taking questions from the audience in real time. So this is good.
Great.
Do we think there are too many choices for consumers out there right now in the wearable space? Are they all kind of doing the same thing? And what are your opinions on what will drive specific device adoption? And you can mention the Apple Watch. You can mention watches, whatever you want. Is it features? Is it price? And what happens when all those features are available on all the same devices? And what are the differentiators? What do we think here?
I think there are too many devices out there right now. I think there's a lot of Me Too's. I think that we will continue to see adoption. And one of the things that we haven't talked about at all, but I think should be mentioned in this context is fashion.
Right.
And I think to an extent, the winner will create something that's attractive and elegant. If you look at what if you talk to Hossein at Jawbone, he's been talking about wearable computing for years, and all of their design is very in line with Apple's. It's very sleek. It's very attractive. Some of the products, I'll cite the Misfit because I think it's a particularly poor one. It's just a very unattractive device, and I think that until manufacturers get that piece right, adoption is going to be difficult because there's a segment of the population that just won't wear them.
Have you seen the Swarovski? How do you pronounce that?
Swarovski.
The Shine, yeah, the Misfit, and that's like bling, right? And that is a. Have you seen that?
But aesthetics are very important.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you think the Shine is unattractive, but yet the Jawbone is attractive. And nothing against Jawbone. I think they're a wonderful company. But Jawbone is inherently a very male aesthetic, where the Shine is actually a very much more female, sleek. It has actually a metal band. I mean, there's much more, but I'm actually wearing one.
I saw that. Yeah.
And I think that many of them, when you say Me Too, I think the Fuel Band, the Jawbone, you're right. I think that many of them they act, but they're all very, very male. It's all targeting a very specific aesthetic. I don't know my women friends that would wear them. They just don't. They are the ones that end up in drawers. It's like, well, I want to try out the functionality. I want to see if it benefits me enough to get past this aesthetic.
So that right there, I'm going to say I don't think there are too many, and that is because we're at a stage right now that I consider the stage where it's what's going to work and what's not. Exactly to your point, what's good for me and what's not.
Right.
And I think right now, from corporate standpoint, companies that are making these devices, right, as well as consumers, it's what's of value, right, and what is it that's going to last and need to be there. And then you're going to get the real innovators out there that are bringing some of these pieces together. Maybe into one device, maybe into multiple devices that work together, such as smartwatches and smartphones. You can't use smartwatch without a smartphone these days. But when you bring those pieces together, then you're going to get the real value, right? And then I can tell you that the too many devices will go away because some companies will create the really good devices, right? And people will go, I'm using this. There may still be 21 smartwatches out there, right? Because if they're on the Google platform or the Apple platform, one or the other, they likely do the same thing and they interact with the same devices. And people can choose, I like this brand versus this one, or this aesthetic versus this aesthetic, but it does the same thing for the most part, right?
Yeah.
Those aren't differentiating that much. At some point, lots of them are going to take your blood pressure, your pulse, whatever it may be, right? And how much you're sweating and you name it, as well as tell you have an incoming call or your text, right? But you're going to get to choose what you want. It's the next level of devices. I think they're going to take it,
Agreed.
where it's going, where you have something that is a standalone, that does do something beyond anything else in the marketplace, right?
We have moved into some, we're moving into some high fashion. I mean, you've seen Tory Burch launch with a bracelet, opening ceremony. You've seen a couple, and now there's like 3 other ones. Furstenberg's coming out with one, and 3 others are actually set to launch. So that's exciting, and I think that definitely needs to happen because aesthetics do matter. People are not going to wear something on their body that is not pleasing to them. They might try it for a bit regarding functionality to see if there's some benefit brought to them by that. But if they're not going to wear it day after day, if it doesn't please them, if it doesn't work for them overall in the long term. So I'm excited to see where that goes, but I still feel that it's, in essence, and I'm quoting someone else here, it feels a bit like the brick cell phone stage with regards to that type of, implementation. We're not quite there yet. We're getting closer. And so I think that your analogy is quite right.
Well, we went from everyone having a watch, right? I used to have a watch on my wrist, and then I stopped wearing a watch 10 years ago.
Yeah, because.
And so, and then, so I mean, well, let's ask the question, who has a watch here? Right, so you've gone back.
I have the.
Okay, who's wearing a watch today? I've gone back to wearing a watch. I didn't wear one today, but I've gone back to wearing a watch again. And it's a early 60s Omega because it's cool. And guess what it does? It tells time. That's what it does. And so
only that.
And only
Yeah,
that. That's all
only
it does, So is the Apple Watch a watch? Is that what its main purpose is? I said I would bring this up on just one question, but is the Apple, why are we calling it the Apple Watch? Because is it really for telling time? What do we think about this? I mean,
Play on words.
yeah, right?
Yeah.
Watch.
Sure, but is it in? But it's still in the. I know
that's
that's all
why-
right.
Sorry,
The form factor is that of a watch.
It's interesting.
Right?
So this
Yeah.
wearable actually can be a watch, and you can set its functionality to show you your progress over time, right? So how much I've moved during the day, or it can give me the watch function first. It automatically defaults to how much I have moved throughout the day. I had to go back and reset it so that it would show me the time first, because I thought that was what I wanted to see from it. If I was wearing it on my wrist, that's what I wanted it for. Initially, of course, I always do use it, to check my, from a motivation standpoint, to see how much I've moved as well. But I do use it as a watch quite often, believe it or not. And I have not had a watch just like you for about 10 years because I have a cell phone.
Right.
I have to tell you, when the smartwatches first came out, I don't know if anyone else has this problem in meetings, but I used to have this problem, and your phone would vibrate and you just real quick, hey, just want to see who it is real quick, right? What I started using it for is my hands on the table, I'm listening, and my wrist vibrates, and I look down, see what the message is, important or not. Nope, it's not important, I move on. And it gives me the data right here on my wrist as quick as I need it, right? Phone calls coming in. This may or may not be vibrating. I look down to see who the call is coming in from, right? It's important or not important.
Yeah, it allows you to be more discreet about how you react to your phone, because I think many people feel like some people don't at all realize that they're being rude, picking up their phone all the time during a dinner or during a conversation. But Google Glass is also a good example of a wearable that I think has some legs, because you can do so much with Google Glass. My technical counterpart, he wears it all the time, and he can read messages, he can read emails, he can get directions. Google Glass does a lot, and I
wouldn't
think
be having dinner with him though.
yeah, exactly.
I could not have dinner with someone
and you can take a
wearing Google Glass.
picture.
Yeah.
You can video people on demand by just voice commands, which creates a tremendous amount of privacy concerns for people around you. And also it can be a distraction. So there's safety concerns as well. So that, there's all these different form factors of wearables. But to your point, I think at some point, these companies are going to aggregate it into a form factor where it serves multiple purposes, because you're not going to wear Google Glass, your iWatch, you're going to have your phone and your earpiece, your jawbone all in there. You're going to look like a robot.
But think about how many times think about, and you talk about security, think about how many times you have something, whether that's going to the gym or somewhere else, that you want someone or someplace to recognize who you are, right? You're going up to your treadmill to work out, or your, whatever it may be. Being able to have a device that could talk to, right, and recognize who you are as you get there, right, is extremely valuable. So these are just little, usability, solutions, but these are, you
Back
take
to privacy.
the privacy and security, right,
Now,
and tie it to
because if
consumer
you're wearing
usability.
3 devices between your phone, your glass, and your watch that potentially have GPS capabilities, what if someone's trying to find you who you don't want them to find you? So now all of a sudden it makes it pretty easy, because you've got 3 different areas that might be generating a
You might have
GPS
forgotten to turn
signal.
one off. Yeah.
Well, Kirk, I like the way you did. The use case of that is really that micro moments, and wearables are allowing us to experience information in new ways. And Forrester, in their report, coined it micro moments. I'm sure it was Forrester, unless it was different. But micro moments definitely are important, and so the usability there. So it's not just about it being a watch, but the ability to ingest information in short snippets, rather than always have to pull up my phone, pull up the application, whatever it may be. So I think that's where it'll apply. We had a question back here. Yeah.
I think one of the things, I agree with a lot of you guys, but there's also the value in it lacks luster because it's so temporary, because we're always looking for the next year's device and, smart devices like that. I mean, I have like 20 devices, and I only started wearing one because the size and the fit for women, it's great. But, there's Cartier, there's Bulgari, there's Gucci. They already have it for their private clients. One of the things that I really sensed was it's not an heirloom. There's no symbolic mementos to give it to your next generation or your next kid, because the technology is so evolving so fast that you have to replace it every year. And it gets expensive. I mean, if it wasn't for like gifts or anything else, I wouldn't have 20, 30 devices. But trying it all, it is very similar in that context, but there's also the behavior modification or enhancement and improvement of your lifestyle. And I think that's missing, because I agree with Evo doing it with waterproof submerging for surfers and swimming. I agree that there is a market for every single devices, but I don't see a value in the aspects of longevity in this. Data is one thing, but I think incorporating into one's personal life stems a little bit deeper. And I think I see it as a machine of like, okay, next year we're going to sell you something else, like disposables, encapsulated into your time collection from the very beginning of the first version all the way through. Am I going to be a collector and a hoarder, or am I going to see that in the future of like, yes, I see my progress.
Right.
I haven't seen anything.
What if all 20 to 30 devices were able to access the same information that you used in your first device?
Well, Google, Apple, all of them tried the health box, and it hasn't because of the HIPAA compliances, and that's one of the deterrents of regulation is those things. So I'm going to shoot this to you: is how do you think? There's newer gamings, all this other stuff out there. How do you visualize or think that someone's going to merge all this and be not too clunky and say, hey, this is a beautiful piece?
Are you asking how they're going to, or do we see that happening?
Your perspective.
My perspective, I said this earlier actually in the panel. I think it's a matter of figuring out what's most valuable to consumers, right? And one of the big problems is there's billions of consumers, right? And so you're not going to get everyone the same, but you can hit a general area that's of value, right, to people, and bringing those pieces together and consolidating those into particular devices. There's never going to be one device, in my opinion. Okay? I don't think you're ever going to have one thing on your wrist that's going to do everything, even 25 years from now. I think there will be multiple devices There will be very specific devices, right? Devices when you're exercising, devices that you're doing other things. There will be some that you can use multiple, right? You're not going to go sleep with this on your head, right? But you may sleep with something on your wrist. Yet there's no reason that this, while you're running, can't communicate with this and come into a database that creates value for you, right? And deliver that value in the way that you want it to, because you choose the preferences, right? You talked about earlier making it personal to you. That comes down to preferences. What you've talked about, in my opinion, comes to software, right? Not necessarily the hardware. You can make a beautiful device, and lots of companies will, and you talked about private clients and that kind of stuff. That's great, but somewhere in the background, it's got to be of value to you, and not as value to you just today. They have to be thinking about and adapting to what's of value to you in 5 years from now. Does that make sense?
And what you're talking about is the aggregation of data on you over time. Where does that go? And how can that book of data year over year over year, so you can see trends of different things, be it your heart rate, be it blood pressure, be it, whatever you're trying to track, where is that going to be stored? I think the problem is that from a device standpoint, companies are creating devices, and they're trying to sell, and they're making revenue.
Mm-hmm.
What you're asking for, nobody is going to necessarily profit from that near term. It's going to be very hard for a consortium to come together to say, okay, just like in digital media, you've got ultraviolet, where they tried to come together and create media lockers for everybody, for the public. That still isn't really taking off. And there's still so many different people, or I should say companies, involved in all these actions, that it makes it very hard for something to come together at the software layer that makes sense for the end user. And then, is this something that you hold on your personal device? Is it going to be client side? You're going to put it on your PC? You're going to put it on your, who still actually has a desktop computer? Hardly anybody. It's going to be on your laptop. Is it going to be on your mobile device? Probably not, because it doesn't have a lot of computing power, and the graphics aren't going to be there. Or is it going to be put in the cloud somewhere? And then if it's going to be put in the cloud somewhere, is it going to be Intel? Is it going to be Google? There's all these different platforms. There's platform players, and then there's device players. So it's such a complex mess that the answer to your question is, who knows? Who knows who's going to step up to spend the money to create something like that in the cloud in a secure way, so that you can maybe take all that information that you aggregated client side and push it up to the cloud.
Under Armour, right?
So that was actually the exact vision of Map My Fitness is, we don't want to own the device. We want to own the data. And, we want you coming to us to input your data and to manage your data. And, my bet is to who owns, look, Under Armour certainly making a good push now with, hundreds of millions of digital consumers and their data in their cloud. But everybody else has also recognized the value of the cloud. So I don't know about Sony, but most of these players who have devices have opened their cloud to other devices. Withings is a good example. You guys might not be familiar with Withings. They're actually a pretty large company out of France, and they've got a watch and all of these home products, a smart scale, and they've opened their app to other OEMs as well. And I think that most players in the market today see that there's real value in owning the data. The hardware business is tough. And Sony, you guys could probably comment to that. But if I were to bet who's going to own that data, right now it looks like it would probably be either Google or Facebook. But you never know. There could be other companies that come out and want to own that data and help you manage it.
And that's one of the things, we're going to wrap this up. I had just one last bit, the social piece that we didn't touch on.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about the consumer warrior as the title of this, the importance of sharing that information in the social piece. And I've got a little feel-good story here just to kind of wrap it up. Laura, do you want to make one more point?
Oh, no. That's
Okay, because I think in the end, we have to remember some of the use cases, right? And the fact that we are social beings, and we actually do want to let people know that we're healthy. It's kind of funny that people will compete in these spaces. Fitbit, in many ways, is about your personal health, your personal fitness, but also sharing it with your friends and family and competing on a leaderboard. So this is a feel-good story. Just bear with me real quickly here. So I have a friend, Jack's 54 years old, 55. His wife, Meg, just turned 50. Their daughter, Chloe's 16, and Cooper is 13. Now, as the kids got a little older, they stop talking. That's what happens. I don't know if anyone has kids in the room, but once you have teenagers, it just sort of changed. The dynamic changes a little bit. Jack doesn't work out at all. Meg just works out all the time. She's that consumer warrior and has the wearables and everything like that. Chloe is sports enthusiast, on this team and a cheerleader. Cooper writes code. He's in front of his computer. He gets home from school and he just writes code. So he doesn't get any exercise at all. So for Christmas, everyone got a Fitbit. And I thought it was really interesting because you're not talking about a sporty family except for two of them, Meg and Chloe. And when I spent some time with Jack before I did this panel, I said, hey, you know what? Tell me about what's going on with the Fitbit and what's the experience like? And he said it brought his family together. It kind of cracked me up because Cooper's actually walking. He's getting up from his computer only to compete against his family. That's the only reason why he's doing it. He can't wait to get back to the code, but he's like, he will not lose that competition. And Chloe's working out. Jack's working out. He was picking up the kids, and I said, hey, Jack. He's like, well, I got to do, what are you doing? He's walking up and back down the block just so he can get more steps to compete. And he showed me the leaderboard on his family, and now they have other friends on that. So I look at that and I go, they don't really, the data matters to them for that purpose.
Right.
And they're willing to invest in that, and it brought their family together, and it just cracked me up. I loved it. I thought it was good stuff. So
There's value in that.
there's value
There is
in that.
value
There
in
sure
that.
is.
That's
And so that
wonderful.
data, as
Yeah.
we use it, so it was an important one. So that family got back together. So listen, we have about 7 minutes. So are there any other questions for our panelists? In the blue.
For wearables, what do you think is going to be the most important content for lifestyle? Is it going to be entertainment driven? Is it going to be more information driven? Obviously, the obvious players are using apps for Apple Watch. I'm just curious about the future content for watching.
From my perspective, I think that for a consumer, it's the entertainment side of it. I think when the statistics is good, but you're going to put that statistical data into an entertainment format. So, but I think when you get to the non-consumer, which is the professional level, which I mentioned earlier, I think that is driven by consumers' want and need for that information related to professional. I think it's the statistical data for sure. But again, it's going to be put into a entertainment format because it's going to be put in a way of graphs and information that can be used for your sports.
Sports
play.
analogy.
Yeah, no.
Oh, fantasy football.
Fantasy football. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, drawing a blank. For fantasy type of stuff, right? So, but it comes down to entertainment as far as I'm concerned on both levels.
And the professional athlete would probably be wearing a more sports tracking wearable rather than a smartwatch in that instance.
Correct.
Right.
Oh, were you specific to smartwatch? I apologize. That's
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
where it's going.
And
Yeah.
eye health.
I think it depends upon the form factor. I don't think many
Exactly.
people are going to be watching full-length movies on their watch.
I
Some
have-
people
I have
may
seen
be
it.
doing that on
I've
their
seen it on
phone,
the phone.
iPads, yes. But I think most of these wearables are designed to give you feedback on you, be it how much you're stepping, what your heart rate is, etc. So I think the important thing is that these devices are gathering information on you. Now, what is being done with that information? That's the important question that I don't think anybody's got the answer to right now, or where that's going to go. But I think your point is that eventually it turns out to be entertainment, and in your case, Brian, it might be entertaining for that family to be able to compete with one another. But the end result is that it's information on those people that is driving a different and hopefully a better behavior within that family. Right. So in the end, it's end user data, and it's about health and better living.
Absolutely.
Hey, Brian, there's a question in the back right of the room. He's been
Okay.
raising his arm for
Oh,
one.
sorry.
You probably don't see
We're
it.
good, no problem.
So, I've been seeing some implanted devices for health reasons for people. And where in the past it might have been like a proprietary device for the data on the outside. Now people are controlling it or getting data through iOS and Android apps. Do you see this crossing over at all into the sports and fitness area where people are going to start getting things implanted?
Yes.
Either using it to read data or to improve performance in other ways?
Is that?
Yeah, I guess it's possible. It depends upon what information you're trying to get out of that device. If you were to embed something in your body, then there would be something chemically that you're trying to track, be it, some sort of chemical that, adrenaline, or, your body is a chemical
oxygen.
factory. So there's lots of different things that you could potentially track. We're not there yet.
They
I
look
don't
at blood
think.
oxygen. They look at adrenaline, they
Yeah,
look at
blood
everything.
oxygen, sure.
So
Google contacts that monitor your glucose.
Mhm.
Yep.
Glucose.
So glucose
And
is
then they can
definitely
tell
one
peak
for
times.
diabetics.
Yeah.
Because
That's
Medtronic has that already,
professional
right?
sport,
Yeah.
but yes. they're
But to the
looking
point earlier, every year you have to change that. That's gonna be a little painful.
at- It's actually just barely under the skin, and it's a long-term, I mean, calling it a wearable is definitely a stretch, I don't actually have a name for it. I call it an
Embeddables.
injectable,
Is that a
embeddable. Yeah,
consumable?
exactly. It's something that you wear it's almost like a Band-Aid like over it. The athlete wears it for a very long time, sweat resistant.
Which one is this, Laura? Is this-
It's an embeddable, or, whatever term you want to call for it, but it takes certain readings and then it emits that data back out.
I mean, that's bleeding edge.
Mhm.
I think there's some technology like that available. Most of it is specifically for medical devices for treating that diabetic patient, or for
Yes.
helping that person who's got arrhythmia to correct their heartbeat.
Yes.
Eventually, 20 years from now, I see probably far more applications of that, for God knows what reasons, but yeah, I imagine that
They've
it'll go there.
Yeah, they're talking about it for everything biometrics. They're talking about it for everything from, behavior modification. They're talking about all kinds of things, but yeah. But sports, they're looking at those use cases
And
actively.
as those devices are connected, that's when you really talk about some scary stuff in terms of hacking.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Privacy is a very
Absolutely.
big concern.
We had one more question. There was one back, all the way in the back over here. So just, and then we'll get to
I don't know where.
So what you were saying about Google Glass, so I was one of the first Glass users, and I love the device and every second of it. And she's not worried. But I'm not worried about it. I think Google failed me because they didn't establish a category. They made a great device, but the category was so scary, with such huge barriers to entry,
Mhm.
that it seems that it fell because of the category and not the technology. And when I look at all the technology of the watch that's similar, do you think that category can be established by someone that's not Apple?
Oh, yeah. I think Google Glass is not going away. I know that the project kind of ended, but I think there's a second phase of it. And I imagine that others are going to copy Google. I think actually Apple is looking at that and has
Yeah,
plans
we-
for a device like that, but something that interacts with your eye. An ocularly driven device is definitely on the roadmap, and many other companies, I would
we
imagine,
see
are going to
Google
come out
Glass
with it.
being used all the time in industry, like all types of heavy industrial use. Anyone that needs both hands, they need to, but still be able to have voice interaction. We see it used at a high rate.
Yeah, but for consumers,
Yeah.
it was a great experiment, and I think it's going to continue on. But there are so many different applications for that
Agreed.
type of technology beyond heads-up technology in a car.
In specific, just addressing the fear factor of consumers, with people having a heads-up display, it doesn't seem like it's echoed the same with the watch where you're measuring our heart.
Not wanting
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
So
the
So you're
perception.
addressing me on that one. So I think there's still going to be the ability to have that out there. But again, it is one of those concerns, right? Same as the concern, some people have concerns about accepting an application and others won't, right? And it's a matter of what are you doing with me and my information related to what's, our interaction is right now. Would I sit across the table and have a interview with someone that's wearing Google Glass, right? Or something like that? Maybe not, right?
I think the fear is video, right? I mean, that's
Correct.
the thing that you don't want to be captured without your knowledge. And I have an interesting analogy. So I had breakfast the other day with the guy from Amazon who built the Echo. And for those of you who don't know the Echo, it's a device that sits in your home, and you can ask it to do things. You can ask it for scores. You can ask it about video content. You can ask all sorts of things, and it's a sort of personal assistant device. What they did, which I thought was pretty interesting, is they recognized. So it's I think he said there's 19 microphones so that it can literally, if I had a device in the back of the room, I could just speak normally and it would hear me. One of the things that they were fearful of is that people thought they would be recorded and not know it. So they put a really bright red light on it that will go on when the recording's on. I think that if you had something like that on the Google Glass, people would have less apprehension engaging with you because they would know, are you recording me or are you not?
It actually does, but it's susceptible to hacking. So what if somebody hacked and stubbed out the code that made that light go on when the video goes on? So that goes back to application security. But you're right, there are physical ways that hardware could let people know that something's happening, yet there are software ways where that can be defeated as well. So
And
I think it's just
It's
ahead of its
complex.
I
time.
think
No,
it's
I was
also a
sure.
perception issue. I think, oh, I'm sorry, go
The
ahead.
same thing that when you're recording somebody on a phone, there's an audible chirp
Mhm.
Yeah.
every 5 seconds. It goes beep.
also defeatable by software.
And I think with the Google Glass, I think it's also a perception issue. I think that consumers, even though there's a light, even though, you know, there are means when you are talking to someone and they are recording, it is apparent when you're talking to them that you are being recorded. You know it when you're sitting right across the table from them. But there's been a lot of, it's a perception issue. The general consumer doesn't know that. Even if you tell them, they can't displace all of the misinformation that they have absorbed. So they have they've already made their decision, and it's a very hard thing to dissuade or change that person's perception.
Yeah.
It would be a hard call. It would need to a complete, which, you know, Google has recognized, they would need a complete reset on the form factor to basically get people or the public back behind that new paradigm.
And one other thing I'll say is that this is more of a comment that technology companies need to be a lot more transparent about their security policies and also more simplify that security policy, because for the consumer, it's very hard to figure out what exactly they're signing up for or what the liability is were they to use some specific device. And companies could do a lot better. You know, we work with a lot of different companies to help protect applications, and you know, there's social media companies that are being very specific about how they're addressing security concerns. And I think that really helps the entire end user base so that they know what that company's doing, why they're doing it, how it impacts them. Unfortunately, for many technology companies, that's buried in, you know, 50 pages of a privacy policy that they really don't have time or inclination to read through. So anyway.
All right. We're out of time. Sorry. I want to thank all the panelists for joining us. This was fun, and I learned a bunch too, because this isn't necessarily 100% my field. I hope you did as well. We'll stick around for about 5 more minutes or so, and I'm assuming that you folks will be ready for questions independently. So thanks so much for attending, and have a great rest of your show.
I know, it's so bright.